Hello and welcome to The Wire. I am Sumedha. Today we're having an important conversation about the anti-Islam, anti-Muslim violence which has triggered in Sweden. We'll be talking extensively about the rise of the far right and the neo-Nazi party in Sweden, as India currently is also dealing with communal violence and communal tensions in more than one state in a spate of instances. We'll also be looking at the international context. We'll also be talking about what is happening in Sweden. And I'm joined by a very special guest with us today who will be sharing her insights with us. I'm joined by Dr. Sumaya Sheikh. She is a neuroscientist. She was the founder of the Alt News Science. She also runs a very important endeavor which is called While End. So we will be adding more descriptions about her work and her journey in our comments section so that you can know about her and you can follow her work. And we will be discussing what is going on in Sweden. But to give an insight as to what's transpired so far is that in the last couple of days, Sweden has witnessed a series of instances of Quran burning, of the holy book being burnt on the call of this right-wing leader. And and we will be talking about him, the party. And so far, we know that this is not the first time that this anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment is picking up pace in the country. So we'll be pointing, hopefully, towards the kind of patterns which we've been seeing in the last couple of years as well. So, Dr. Sumaya, thank you so much for sparing the time, and thank you for having this conversation with us. My first question to you, as somebody who's been following Sweden and as an outsider, is that what is going on? How do we understand this pattern of violence? We know that there have been injuries. We know that the protests by this far right party and Rasmus Paludan, it has turned violent, and substantial effects can be seen on the ground. So what do we know about it? How are you looking at the situation currently?
Thanks, Sumedha, for having me. Right now, if we're post Easter and whatever the events that led to the riots were designed to occur at the time of Easter. We have a 4-day holiday here, and until Monday, most of the things were settled down. And Tuesday there was some aftermath, but that was it. So now we've come down to Saturday, where all of it is settled because people have gone back to their lives, they've gone back to work, and they don't have the time to engage in whether the protests that are pro the hardline party, which is Stamkurs, which is like a neo-Nazi party that is led by Rasmus Paludan, who evoked the anti-Islamic protests and burned the Quran, and or against the protests against that particular party. So both of these protests or rioting, they've all been to come to a halt at the moment because people simply do not have the time. It was engineered to occur during these 4 days where everybody was available to engage in the politics and whatever the aftermath that came with it. The reason that this happened, as I said, it's engineered. The reason that it happened was this particular leader, Rasmus Paludan, is half Swedish, half Danish. In Denmark, is slightly towards the right than Sweden politically. There's a lot more acceptance of anti-immigrant ideas in Denmark as opposed to Sweden. Sweden, as you know, took a lot of Syrian refugees during the crisis. Now it's taking some Poland refugees, refugees coming via Poland from Ukraine. So it's taking some Ukrainian refugees. So Sweden has had a long kind of demonstrated influence of a lot more secular openness when it comes to politics. So this guy, Rasmus, he's a 40-year-old lawyer by training. He's anti-immigration, but anti-non-West immigration. So he's mostly against Muslims, but in general, all brown people, everybody that is not coming from the West, and so on. And he's done these things before. He has planned the Quran burnings before, and not just during this Easter time in different cities, but there was also another time when he did similar things. And these things were specifically conducted in areas where there's a lot of immigrant population. So it started here in my city, Linköping, where there's a small suburban area called Sjötorp. And in Sjötorp, there's a lot more population from other countries than the Swedes who were born here, raised here, or rather their grandparents are born here. Because now what we see is the second generation. Those are the people who majority of the times took part in these protests and riots. Generally, the first generation Swedes, or in any Western country, the first generation is less likely to engage in such activities. It's always the second generation that does it. So that happened, and a lot of protests that came opposing to the Quran burnings came from young people, and as a result of that, a lot of police officers got injured, and a lot of these young people also got arrested. So that is what happened. But it's all calmed down now. It happened in a couple of different places, in Stockholm, in Gothenburg, Malmo, Örebro, and that happened in areas specifically where there was high number of immigrants. And there's all types of immigrants, including Eastern European, not just Muslim immigrants. That is a very important point. It's not a Muslim neighborhood or a suburb. They're mixed groups of people living there.
Yeah. And as you described, it has calmed down definitely, but you were mentioning something about the political history of this, that this has happened before. And do you see that the fact that the elections are impending, do you think that's how it was strategized? Do you think that's how it was planned to sort of polarize the sentiment on the ground, to rake in more anti-immigration sentiment, and particularly adopt a hardline approach and promote the rise of the far right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reason why I got super intrigued was that why it was trending in India, and people were showing this at the same time when there was a lot of violence in India happening, and they were a lot of the accounts were showing that, look, wherever Muslims are going, this is what's happening, etc. But obviously, there's an agenda behind these things. What we're seeing here in Sweden is this particular guy, the leader of the party, Rasmus Paludan. He is a 40-year-old who is a politician in Denmark. He's a resident of Denmark otherwise. His father is Swedish, and he had an elected seat that won some 1.4 or 1.8% votes. And that seat was lost by him recently. And since the Swedish elections are quite close, he wants to enter into politics in Sweden. And obviously, there is less acceptance of someone like him in Sweden. And in order to radicalize, and I mean, what I'm saying, radicalize the Swedish society, is in order for the Swedes to vote for him, he needs to demonstrate some sort of agitation by the Muslims on the ground that suggests that, look, we need to put a halt to this immigration policy, especially coming from the Muslim countries, and how Muslims are less tolerant, that even by the burning of a book, they're going to come out and protest and create all this violence, particularly hurting the police, which is like, police is not very militarized here. Police is quite friendly here, and a lot of Swedes in particular have a lot of sympathy for the police in the way that they get thrown under the bus, especially even now. Swedes are talking like how the police was thrown under the bus and left to face injuries and all the violence because the government could not take enough decisions in order to stop these riots. I mean, both they should have stopped the people coming out and protesting and conducting violence and burning the cars, but also this guy has a history, and his party has a history of evoking these type of sentiments, and it should have been stopped in the first place, not allowed it to happen in multiple cities in this Easter weekend, when this is like a recipe for disaster in itself. But somehow he was protected, and somehow he was given the chance to do this. So he is looking to gain enough signatures to register the party here in Sweden, and looking to have some sort of political vote bank, so he could get into politics here and right in time before the election. So that is what he wanted to do, and he succeeded. I mean, what people have done on the streets have succeeded. So the fact is that Rasmus himself has been in trouble with the police many times before. He's conducted violence before. He's engaged in violence, and the people that were arrested by the police in Sweden, who were the rioters, the young people, they were not all Muslims. The second thing, we found out that there were young people who have had planned anti-police riots and attacks towards the police even before. A lot of them are already under the radar of the police, and they're already parts of criminal gangs. So it's almost like you're trying to rub two very volatile substances together, and then there goes a riot. I mean, this is like a perfect recipe to evoke. But what the media is getting out of it is, or the general public is getting out of this is these are Muslims, very intolerant, doing this specifically during Ramadan, against a person who's politician and who has the right to free speech. Just completely taken out of context. This should not have allowed to happen in the first place.
Absolutely. And since you're drawing parallels with India, what we've seen in India so far is that in the last 1 month, we've seen these processions of Hindu religious festivals, be it the Ram Navami or the Hanuman Jayanti, and they pass through exactly in the same way through Muslim-dominated areas and Muslim-dominated localities, where we've seen these videos come out on social media, our ground reports, where we've highlighted how communal slurs were passed and weapons were used, swords were used, and sticks were used in order to provoke, in order to incite communal sentiment on the ground. So how do you see these parallels playing out, and the similar pattern playing out here in India as well? So if we were to sort of compare the situations and understand it in a bigger context.
Yeah, I mean, there are huge parallels here. Of course, there the processions of the Hindu festivals, they're allowed to go through those areas. Nobody should be stopping them, but at the end, if they're stopping right outside a mosque and specifically provoking them with weapons, I mean, when did weapon and hating another community became a part of the festivals? It's the same thing with this particular party. If he has far right views or any, political views that are not in line with the general Swedish sentiments. So, I mean, he should be allowed to have his program wherever he wants to. There should not be any curbing of free speech. But when did Quran burning and provocative stuff become a part of free speech? I mean, that is very clear that the intention is not to spread the ideas of what is right and wrong according to them. The idea is very much provocation and incitement of some sort of rioting like situation. So it's I think it's almost overlapping. What I see is, therefore, I mean, what I basically do is I use neuroscience and psychiatry to analyze radicalized violence, not just radicalization, but how humans in general behave in different ways, and when they become highly radicalized to the point of turning to violence, how they have reduced empathy, that they have an increased feel good hormones, some of these like dopamine and serotonin, in the areas that are very much motivation driving, amygdala, prefrontal cortex is tied up with the amygdala, where you have reduced in empathy. But there are other areas. Nucleus accumbens is one of them, for example, where these hormones kind of give you this heightened drive of something that is similar to addiction. So when you are addicted to something, you take that substance and it gives you this wonderful high of this really good feeling. These are some of the mechanisms in which you see an overlap of the brain circuitry when people engage in violence, and they're addicted to it. Certainly they want more of it, and they drive a lot of pleasure out of it. So if that is, and you could see all the people that were taking swords and all these weapons, they were smiling. They didn't have a guilt. They didn't have, obviously it comes with an aspect of some sort of a dehumanization of the other person, and also victimhood, because deeply these people are victimized. They feel that they've been unjustly treated by their government or before, and now they want to take that kind of revenge. So it's not really that they're just in power, but they're also feeling victimized. And in the same way, the far right groups are pretty much the same. I've spoken to tons and tons of neo-Nazis and Islamists in the process, and this is what you feel. They feel that they're something really bad has happened to them, or collectively something bad has happened to Muslims in other countries that they identify with, or white people in different countries that they identify with. America, in particularly, looks towards Sweden. American neo-Nazis, they look towards Sweden and say that, look, this is what's happening in Sweden, and we don't want that happening. That's why we need to exclude Muslims from our, the political spaces, or civil spaces. So I think there's a huge overlap here. I mean, humans are pretty similar all over, regardless of race or religion or ethnicity. Our biology doesn't change much. Even to a lot of extent, our social circumstances also remain the same. Much of the psychology kind of slightly differs from one into another. There's heightened sense of fear in places like India. There's more stress around the haves and have-nots. There's also vulnerability in the way that, I mean, especially after the pandemic, there's economic problems. That's not the case really in Sweden, but victimhood can be evoked from anything. I mean, misinformation is one of the biggest things that can start these sort of problems. So I think there's a huge overlap in the same way. It is absolutely planned, it's inciting, and it is fulfilling the agenda. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's fulfilling the agenda of the very people who start these things. So if Muslims retaliate here or in India, it's almost proving the far right party's agenda real, and it re-emphasizes on what they're trying to say. So they're helping each other in a way. So what people should do is stay away from any provocation, not do anything. Obviously there are problems in India where there's very little help available, and some of them is also in self-defense. But essentially, people should stay away from violence altogether and not get provoked by some of these hardliners.
Absolutely. And you're extremely right in terms of pointing out towards the kind of insecurities towards this narrative of victimhood, which we're seeing spread on the ground as well, with the narrative of how Hindus are in danger, Hindu khatre mein hai. So this is a big sort of a plank which is being used here as well. My final question to you is that how do you see this transpiring in the future in terms of the rise of the far right globally? And do you see that this will assume a center stage, be it in India, in countries like Sweden, also in France? So we're seeing this pattern of the right-wing narrative take over. So how do you see that playing out in the future?
Right. So when we talk about far right, we only talk about white supremacy and neo-Nazis. And when I consider far right, I think of what is politically far right. And far right could be in places like Europe and the US, or it could also be, yes, Taliban is an Islamist party, and it is Islamist, but it is also a far right party, right? Yeah. So politically, whoever's in, it's a far right Islamist party. So politically, whoever's in favor of discrimination of a particular group of people is a far right party, whether it's in Taliban, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, or what is happening with Pakistan in Bangladeshi minorities. It's a similar issue, and what is happening in India as a far right party. It pushes, or far right ideology rather, it pushes some of the minority inclusivity for minorities onto one side, and it pushes the majoritarian agenda. The problem, however, I see is that I don't see this going away anytime soon. I think we have just started to feed the monster, and the monster, and a big help to feeding this monster was also the COVID pandemic, where a lot of people were in lockdown, and enhanced the insecurities of people, both economically, socially, and also push their mental health into a very deep into a deep box. So one side, the mental health was affected because of the COVID infection itself. There was a lot of those people who told us that the mental health went terrible after the infection. Then there was the economic side of it, and then the lockdown, which isolated these people. So we've seen in Germany, for example, I mean, Germany had elections recently, a couple of months ago. We've seen a lot of violent crimes, particularly of the extremist violent crimes in the year 2020 to 2022, which is very much, the pandemic time time, people came out and, I think it was a tenfold increase. Um, and similarly in other parts of Europe as well. So the pandemic has really pushed us in that corner. People have had more time to think about politics, and engage in some of the politics, and engage in misinformation that came on their digital platforms. And moreover, with the insecurities, especially with the economic insecurities, you want to have more for yourself and your group, and not for the other group. And by labeling, or throwing one group under the bus, you hope that your community or your group will benefit out of it. So we're not, I mean, we know that there is a general economic problem in the entire world because of COVID, and how the businesses were closed and stuff. So in general, this is not going to go anywhere. The pandemic's only fed this monster that we've created. I think it's going to be an ongoing problem. I mean, Taliban has just got the legitimacy in Afghanistan. It's going to obviously spread in different places. What I've heard is after the fall of ISIS, Turkey has got a lot of these groups that are really empowered, who ran away from the ISIS territories, and now they're huddling into Turkey. Some went to Afghanistan, some went to Albania and all these Eastern European countries, and they're spreading out and thinking where to go. So a lot of these people have also went back, like the foreign fighters have also went back to Europe, somehow, because they had some sort of a disenfranchisement with ISIS. That happens in a lot of far right or extremist groups anyway. So they've gone back. So now they are in their respective countries, in Europe and the US and all these places, and in Australia and New Zealand. So we're going to see an overflow of this problem, specifically after the pandemic. And it's not going to stop. I don't think in the next 10, 20 years we're going to solve it. Since the war on terror started, I think we've only gone backwards now. So we have to be very careful, specifically look at other science-based research, particularly evidence-based research that goes into the resolving problems with terrorism and domestic terrorism in particular, or any type of violent crimes. And not just look into how politics can shape it, or economics can shape it, because there's a lot more to it of around this human behavior of violence than just politics or economics. So I mean, looking at science is one of the first things that people should be doing, and obviously traversing through different areas and disciplines to solve this problem together. So I think that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you. So that was a very fascinating point that you made about how we need to look beyond the political implications or the political factors and economic factors, and understand human behavior and scientific evidence as well. So I'm really grateful that you joined us and spared some time for us for this conversation. We'd end it at this note, and we'll keep coming back to you, and we will keep reporting throughout India, across Europe, and also enable our viewers to understand these global patterns as well. Thank you, Dr. Sumaya. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.